The blizzard outside the Dalton estate was nothing compared to the ice in Gregory's eyes. "Sign it, Clara. Don't make this more pathetic than it already is," Gregory said, flicking a gold-plated pen across the mahogany desk. The divorce papers sat between them like a tombstone. For 12 years, Clara had been the ghost in this house. She was the one who woke up at 5 a.m. to ensure his suits were pressed to a razor's edge. She was the one who sat through boring charity galas, smiling politely while Gregory's mother, Evelyn, whispered insults about her commoner background, just loud enough for the help to hear. Clara looked at the papers. 12 years, Gregory? I supported you when you were just a junior analyst living in the studio apartment. I sold my mother's jewelry so you could afford the down payment on your first firm. And now you're giving me a settlement of $10,000? Gregory laughed, a sharp metallic sound. That jewelry was costume junk, Clara, and let's be honest, you were a placeholder. You were the girl who was good enough when I had nothing. But I'm the CEO of Dalton International now. I need a woman who matches the brand, someone like Juliana. As if on cue, Juliana stepped into the study. She was 24, draped in mink, and holding a glass of vintage Cristal. She didn't even look at Clara. She looked at the room as if she already owned the square footage. "Is it done yet, Greggy? The car is waiting. We're going to be late for the opera." "Almost, darling," Gregory purred. He turned back to Clara, his face hardening. "The 10,000 is a gift. Technically, according to the prenup my mother made you sign, you're entitled to 0. You came here with a cardboard suitcase, and you'll leave the same way." Evelyn Dalton, the matriarch, appeared in the doorway like a vulture circling a carcass. "Make sure she leaves the keys to the service entrance, Gregory. I don't want her type lingering near the property. And Clara, leave the pearls. They were a family heirloom. They don't belong on the neck of a waitress's daughter." Clara reached up and unclipped the pearls. Her hands didn't shake. That was the first thing Gregory should have noticed, the lack of fear. For 12 years, she had played the role of the submissive, grateful wife. She had dimmed her light so brightly that they truly believed she was a flickering candle. "I'll leave the pearls, Evelyn," Clara said quietly. "But remember this, an heirloom is only valuable if the family name still means something. By tomorrow morning, the Dalton name might not be worth the ink on these papers." "Is that a threat?" sneered Gregory. "What are you going to do? Sue me? With what money? You don't even have a bank account I don't control." Clara picked up the pen and signed the papers with a flourish. She didn't read the fine print. She didn't need to. She knew something Gregory had forgotten in his climb to the top. She stood up, straightened her cheap wool coat, and walked toward the door. "Wait!" Evelyn barked. "The shoes! Those were bought with Dalton money. Take them off." The room went silent. Even Juliana looked slightly uncomfortable. But Evelyn was a woman who enjoyed the kill. She wanted Clara to crawl out of the mansion. Clara looked at the cold marble floor. Without a word, she stepped out of her modest heels. She stood in her stockings, the cold of the stones seeping into her bones. "Keep the shoes, Evelyn," Clara said, her voice echoing in the vast hallway. "You'll need them. It's a long walk to the unemployment office." As Clara stepped out into the biting wind and the swirling snow of the driveway, the heavy iron gates of the Dalton estate groaned shut behind her. She heard the click of the digital lock, a lock she had programmed herself. She walked down the long, winding drive, her feet numbing in the snow. She didn't look back at the glowing windows of the mansion. She reached the main road where a single old-fashioned telephone booth stood, a relic of a bygone era. She stepped inside, shivering, and pulled a small silver coin from her pocket. It wasn't a standard coin. It was a commemorative token from the Royal Bank of Luxembourg. She inserted it into the slot. She dialed a number she hadn't called in over a decade, a number that connected to a private line in a villa in the Swiss Alps. The phone rang once, twice. Yes, a deep, gravelly voice answered in French. The bird has left the nest, and the hunters are feeling very brave. There was a long silence on the other end, then the sound of a heavy chair being pushed back. "Clara, is it truly you?" "It's me, Uncle Arthur. I'm standing in the snow in Greenwich, Connecticut. I have no shoes, no money, and a divorce decree in my pocket." "And the Dalton family?" Arthur asked, his voice now dropping into a tone of pure, calculated malice. "Did they treat you well?" "They treated me like a stepping stone." "Then it is time," Arthur said. "The Board of Governors has been waiting for 12 years to hear from the true heir of the Sterling-Vane fortune. Your father's will was very specific, Clara. If you were ever discarded, the clause of total recall would be activated. Does Gregory Dalton know that his firm is actually a subsidiary of your family's holding company?" "He has no idea," Clara said, watching a black limousine pull up to the curb in front of her. "He thinks he's a self-made man." "Then let us show him the truth," Arthur said. "The car is there. Welcome back to the world, Princess." The door of the limousine opened. A man in a crisp suit stepped out, holding a pair of fur-lined boots and a warm cashmere coat. He bowed deeply, a bow reserved for royalty. "Miss Sterling-Vane," the man said, "your jet is fueled and ready. We have much to do before the markets open tomorrow." Clara stepped into the warmth of the car. As the heater thawed her frozen skin, her eyes turned from a soft, hurt brown to a hard, piercing flint. The obedient wife was dead. The heiress had returned. "Do you want me to proceed with Section 2? Section 2 will focus on Clara's transformation and the first cracks in Gregory's empire as her family starts pulling the strings from the shadows." The morning after Clara was cast out, the sun rose over the Dalton estate with a deceptive brilliance. Inside the breakfast nook, the atmosphere was celebratory. Gregory sat at the head of the table, scrolling through his tablet, while Juliana picked at a bowl of organic berries, already discussing the renovation she planned for her new home. "I was thinking of tearing down that old-fashioned library," Juliana said, her voice like sandpaper on silk. "It's so gloomy. We should put in a glass-walled yoga studio. And that garden Clara spent so much time in, it's far too overgrown. I want a minimalist rock garden with a heated pool." Gregory didn't look up. "Do whatever you want, babe. The house is yours. I've already contacted the lawyer to finalize the transfer of the title today. Clara is a ghost now. She's probably sitting in some cheap motel right now, wondering how she's going to pay for her next meal." Evelyn, sitting across from them, sipped her Earl Grey with a satisfied smirk. "I checked the security footage this morning. She walked all the way to the main road in her stockings. The neighbors must have thought she was a common vagrant. It was the perfect ending to a very tedious 12 years. But the celebratory mood was cut short by a sharp, insistent ping from Gregory's tablet, then another and another. "What is it?" Evelyn asked, her brow furrowing. Gregory frowned. "It's just some glitches in the pre-market trading. Dalton International stock is fluctuating, probably just some minor volatility due to the news of the divorce. Investors hate uncertainty." He tapped the screen to refresh the page, expecting to see the green number stabilize. Instead, his eyes widened. The stock wasn't just fluctuating, it was hemorrhaging. In a matter of minutes, the valuation had dropped by 14%. "That's impossible," Gregory muttered, his face turning a shade of pale that matched the linen napkins. There's no news, no scandals. Why is everyone selling? Maybe it's a technical error, Juliana suggested, though she looked more worried about her renovation budget than the company's health. Gregory grabbed his phone and dialed his chief financial officer, Marcus. The call went to voicemail twice before Marcus finally picked up. He sounded like a man who had just seen a ghost. Gregory, where are you? The office is in a complete panic. We're being hit by a coordinated short sale attack from an offshore entity we've never heard of, the SV Holding Group. They're dumping millions of shares and simultaneously calling in every high-interest debt we owe. The SV Group? Gregory shouted, standing up so abruptly his chair screeched against the marble. I've never even heard of them. We don't owe them anything. Our debt is held by the European Central Bank and the Royal Bank of Luxembourg. That's the problem, Marcus shouted back over the sound of shouting traders in the background. The Royal Bank of Luxembourg just sold our entire debt portfolio to SV Holding for pennies on the dollar. And Gregory, they've invoked the insecurity clause. They're demanding full repayment of the $300 million expansion loan by the end of the business day. If we don't pay, they seize the collateral. The collateral? Gregory whispered, his legs going weak. The collateral is the company itself. And this house. Evelyn stood up, her teacup rattling in its saucer. Gregory, what is happening? Who is SV Holding? I don't know, Gregory roared. Call the lawyers. Call everyone. This has to be an illegal takeover. While the Dalton household descended into chaos, 40 floors above the city in a penthouse suite that smelled of expensive lilies and old money, Clara sat in a plush velvet chair. She was no longer wearing a cheap wool coat. She wore a deep emerald silk dress that made her eyes look like dangerous gems. A stylist was finishing her hair, and a team of 3 assistants hovered nearby with tablets. Uncle Arthur stood by the window, looking out at the skyline. The first strike has landed, Clara. The Daltons are currently losing $40,000 a second. Gregory is currently calling his bank, but he'll find that his priority status has been revoked. Clara took a sip of chilled mineral water. He thinks he's fighting a market trend. He doesn't realize he's fighting a person. He never realized who you were, Arthur said, turning to look at her with pride. Your father, my brother, always said you were the most patient of us all. To live in that house for 12 years, to endure that woman's insults and that man's neglect, all to ensure that when you finally struck, there would be nothing left for them to rebuild. It wasn't just about patience, Arthur, Clara said, her voice cool and level. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to see if Gregory Dalton loved the woman or the convenience. Last night, when he told me I was training wheels for his real life, that was the moment I stopped being his wife and started being his creditor. A young man in a sharp suit entered the room. Miss Sterling-Vane, the board of directors at Dalton International has just called an emergency meeting. They are terrified. They want to know if the mystery buyer is willing to negotiate. Clara stood up, her presence filling the room with a weight that would have terrified Gregory. Tell them I don't negotiate with subordinates. Tell them the owner of SV Holding will be present at the court hearing for the debt transition on Friday. Until then, tell the banks to freeze every personal account associated with the Dalton name. I want Gregory to feel what it's like to have a pocket full of nothing. And his mother? The assistant asked. Clara paused, looking at the pearls Evelyn had demanded she return. They were sitting on the side table, real pearls, the ones Clara had secretly swapped for the heirlooms Evelyn thought she had taken. Evelyn likes her status, Arthur, Clara said, her voice cool and level. Contact the local country club and the charity boards. Inform them that the Dalton family is currently under investigation for massive financial insolvency. I want her social calendar to be as empty as Gregory's soul. As the assistant hurried away, Arthur smiled. "You're being very thorough, Clara," Clara said, walking toward the large mirror. She looked at the woman staring back, a woman who could buy and sell the entire street she had walked down the night before. "I'm just making sure that when he finally falls, he doesn't have a soft place to land." Back at the mansion, Gregory was screaming into his phone. Juliana was crying because her credit cards had just been declined at a boutique, and Evelyn was staring at a letter from the bank. The letter stated that the Dalton estate was no longer recognized as private property, but as an asset under active seizure. The invisible earthquake had started, and the ground was only going to keep shaking. By Wednesday, the polished world of Gregory Dalton was no longer just cracking, it was imploding. The man who once prided himself on having the fastest-growing portfolio on Wall Street now spent his mornings staring at a restricted notification on his banking app. He sat in his office, the air conditioning feeling like a cold breath on the back of his neck. The silence was heavy. Usually, his phone rang every 30 seconds with investors seeking his favor. Now it was silent, except for the occasional call from a debt collector or a frantic board member. "Where is the loyalty?" Gregory screamed at his empty office. He had spent years building a network of friends, senators, bankers, and industry titans. But as he reached out to them one by one, he found a wall of glass. "Sorry, Greg," his oldest friend, a hedge fund manager named Silas, had told him earlier that morning. "I'd love to help, but I just got a call from the clearinghouse. They flagged your firm for extensive risk. If I even send you a wire transfer, my own accounts will be audited. I can't touch you. You're radioactive." Gregory slammed his fist onto the mahogany desk. It was as if a giant dome had been lowered over him, cutting him off from the world of money he thought he ruled. He didn't know that every one of those friends had received a brief encrypted memo from the Sterling-Vane legal team. The memo didn't contain threats, it simply contained the truth of who was now holding the strings. In the world of high finance, you don't save a sinking ship when the ocean itself wants it at the bottom. Meanwhile, Evelyn Dalton was facing her own nightmare. She had arrived at the Crystal Oaks Country Club for her weekly bridge tournament, dressed in a Chanel suit and her second-best set of diamonds. She expected the usual fawning greetings from the other women. Instead, as she walked into the dining room, a hush fell over the tables. It wasn't the hush of respect, it was the silence of a scandal being digested. "Evelyn," the club manager said, stepping forward to intercept her before she could reach her table. He looked uncomfortable, but firm. "What is the meaning of this, Richard?" Evelyn snapped, adjusting her pearls. "I have a 1 p.m. reservation." "I'm afraid there's been an issue with the membership dues. The card on file was declined, and as per the new bylaws regarding financial solvency, we've had to suspend your privileges until the matter is cleared." Evelyn felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up her neck. "A technical error. My son is the CEO of Dalton International." "Actually," a voice piped up from a nearby table. It was Lydia Thorne, Evelyn's longest-running rival. Lydia was holding a newspaper with a smirk that could cut glass. "The morning edition says Dalton International is currently in a state of hostile receivership. Is it true, Evelyn? Are they taking the house? I'd be happy to buy that old fountain of yours at the estate sale. It would look lovely in my dog's run." The laughter that followed was the sharpest blade Evelyn had ever felt. She turned and fled, her heels clicking frantically on the marble floor. For the first time in 40 years, she felt small. She felt like Clara. While the Daltons were being dismantled in public, Clara was witnessing the fallout from a distance. She was sitting in the back of a blacked-out SUV parked across the street from the Dalton International building. She watched as employees walked out with cardboard boxes, their faces filled with the same uncertainty she had felt when she was pushed out into the snow. She felt a pang of guilt for the innocent workers, but she had already instructed Arthur to ensure that every lower-level employee would be rehired by a Sterling-Vane subsidiary with a 20% raise the moment the takeover was complete. This wasn't about them. It was about the man at the top. A figure emerged from the building. It was Gregory. He looked disheveled. His tie was loose, his jacket was rumpled, and he was looking around as if searching for someone to blame. He walked toward his car, a custom-built silver sports car, only to find two men in suits standing next to it with a tow truck. Clara rolled down her window just an inch. She watched as Gregory began to shout, waving his arms, pointing at the building. The men didn't flinch. They showed him a repossession order. Gregory reached into his pocket, likely looking for his keys or his phone to call a fixer, but he stopped. He looked at the car, then at the building, and for a fleeting second he looked utterly defeated. "He looks smaller than I remembered," Clara whispered to herself. "Power is an optical illusion, Clara," Arthur said from the seat beside her. "He only looked big because he was standing on your shoulders. Now that you've stepped away, he's just a man in an expensive suit he can no longer afford." "Is the courtroom ready for Friday?" Clara asked, rolling the window back up. "The judge has been briefed on the identity disclosure protocols. The Daltons think they are going to court to fight a bank. They think they are going to argue about interest rates and loan terms. They have no idea that they are going to a sentencing." "And Juliana?" "She left this morning," Arthur said with a dry chuckle. "As soon as the jewelry she bought yesterday was flagged as unverified and the store sent a courier to retrieve it, she packed her designer bags and moved back in with her parents. She didn't even leave a note. It seems Gregory's brand wasn't as attractive without the credit limit." Clara leaned back and closed her eyes. She thought about the blizzard, the cold stone of the mansion floor, and the weight of the pearls Evelyn had ripped from her neck. She thought about the 12 years of silence, of being a shadow, of being told she was dead weight. The weight was finally lifting, but she knew the hardest part was still to come. Facing him, looking into the eyes of the man she had loved, and seeing him realize that the nobody he threw away was the only thing that had ever kept him whole. "Arthur," Clara said as the SUV pulled away from the curb, "make sure the press is there on Friday. I want the world to see the moment the self-made man realizes he was a fraud from the very beginning." The stage was set. The noose was tight. All that was left was the final walk to the courtroom. The Dalton mansion, once a beacon of opulence and light on the hill, was now a tomb of shadows. The power had been cut at sunset, not because of a technical glitch, but because the utility accounts were tied to the corporate entity that was now under a legal freeze. Gregory and Evelyn sat in the grand library, the room where they had once toasted to their triumph over Clara. Now they sat by the dim light of a few half-melted decorative candles, huddled in expensive cashmere blankets that felt like lead against their skin. The silence was deafening, broken only by the whistling wind outside that rattled the heavy window frames. "Where is she, Gregory?" Evelyn's voice was a thin, ragged thread. The arrogance that had defined her for decades had evaporated, leaving behind a frail, bitter old woman. "Where is Juliana? Why hasn't she answered your calls? She has those connections. Her father is on the board of the National Bank." Gregory didn't answer. He was staring into the darkness, a half-empty bottle of scotch in his hand. "Juliana is gone, Mother. She blocked my number. Her father issued a public statement this afternoon. He claimed he barely knew me. He called our association a brief and unfortunate professional acquaintance. Everyone is jumping ship. The rats don't just leave the ship, they're trying to sink it faster so they don't get caught in the whirlpool. We still have the lawyers, insisted Evelyn, her hands shaking as she clutched a candle. The hearing tomorrow is just a formality. We'll show them the contracts. We'll show them the work you've put in. They can't just take a man's life work because of a debt spike. Gregory let out a hollow, jagged laugh. Life's work. Mother, I looked at the audit trail today. Before the servers were locked, I saw something. Every major expansion we made, every miracle acquisition I thought I negotiated, the funding didn't come from the banks. It came from a series of shell companies managed by a trust. I thought I was a genius. I thought I was playing the market. But someone was feeding me. They were fatting me up for the slaughter. He took a long swig of the scotch. And that trust? It's the same one that's calling in the debt. Whoever did this has been planning it since the day I married Clara. They didn't just want my money, they wanted my soul. It's that girl, Evelyn hissed, her eyes glinting with a sudden, misplaced fury. Clara, she must have told someone. She must have leaked our internal files to a competitor. That pathetic, ungrateful little... Stop it! Gregory roared, the sound echoing through the empty halls. Clara is a waitress's daughter. She can barely balance a checkbook. She spent 12 years cleaning your floors and taking your insults. She doesn't have the brains for a global financial hit, and she certainly doesn't have the resources. She's probably sleeping in a shelter tonight. This isn't Clara. This is a predator, a shark. Someone who saw a weakness in the Dalton name and decided to finish us. Evelyn fell silent, shrinking back into her chair. In the flickering candlelight, the portraits of the Dalton ancestors on the walls seemed to be judging them, or perhaps they were just fading into the same obscurity that now awaited the living. 5 miles away, in a suite at the St. Regis, Clara was standing on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. She wasn't drinking scotch. She was holding a small, faded photograph. It was a picture of her father, Heiress in Sterling-Vane, standing in front of the very first factory he had ever built. He would have hated this, wouldn't he? She asked softly. Uncle Arthur stepped out onto the balcony behind her, draping a warm shawl over her shoulders. Your father? No. He believed in the value of the vessel. He used to say that you don't pour vintage wine into a cracked glass. He gave Gregory a chance, Clara. He set up the trust to fund Gregory's dreams because he wanted to see if the man you chose was worthy of the fortune you would eventually inherit. And the verdict? She asked. The verdict was written the moment Gregory signed those divorce papers and let your mother demand your shoes, Arthur said grimly. Harrison always said that a man who treats a nobody with cruelty will eventually treat a somebody with betrayal. He wanted you to be happy, but he built a fortress around your inheritance just in case. The clause of total recall wasn't a trap, Clara. It was an escape pod. Clara looked at the photo one last time before tucking it away. I loved him, Arthur. For the first 5 years, I truly believed we were building something. I thought my silence about my family was a gift, a way for us to be normal. I wanted to be loved for Clara, not for the Sterling-Vane name. And you were, Arthur reminded her. You loved him. He just wasn't capable of returning it to anyone but himself. Tomorrow isn't about revenge, Clara. It's about reclamation. You are taking back what belongs to your bloodline. You are clearing the name. Is the courtroom secured? Only the press you authorized will be allowed in. The Daltons think this is a private bankruptcy hearing. They'll arrive in their best clothes, trying to maintain the illusion of power. They have no idea that the person they are suing for wrongful seizure is the same person they threw out into the snow. Clara turned away from the city lights. Her face was calm, but there was a fire in her eyes that had been dormant for over a decade. I want to be there early. I want to be sitting in the back when they walk in. I want to see their faces when the judge calls the case. It will be a long day, Princess. No, Clara said, walking toward the door. It will be the shortest day of their lives, because when the sun sets tomorrow, the Dalton name will be a footnote in a history book they can no longer afford to buy. As she lay down to sleep, the wind outside the hotel whistled just as it did at the mansion, but for Clara it wasn't a mournful sound. It was the sound of the world shifting on its axis, preparing to return a queen to a throne she had never truly left. The courthouse was a monolith of granite and justice, its steps slick with the remnants of last night's sleet. To the public, it was Friday morning. To Gregory Dalton, it was the day he would slap down the predatory lenders who had dared to freeze his empire. He arrived in a black sedan, not his silver sports car, which had been hauled away on a flatbed, but a rental he had paid for in cash he'd scavenged from a safe in the library. He was dressed in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, his jaw set in a mask of defiance. Beside him, Evelyn walked with a cane she didn't really need, using it more as a prop to garner sympathy from the cameras she expected to see. "Maintain your dignity, Gregory," Evelyn whispered as they approached the heavy brass doors. "We are the Daltons. These banks thrive on intimidation, but they cannot legally seize a primary residence and a foundational corporation without a 3-year discovery period. Our lawyers will tie them in knots until we find new investors." But as they entered the courtroom, the atmosphere wasn't what they expected. There were no flashing cameras, there was no media circus. Instead, there was a heavy, suffocating silence. The gallery was nearly empty, save for a few men in dark suits who looked less like lawyers and more like federal agents. And then Gregory saw her. Clara was sitting in the very back row, partially obscured by a pillar. She was wearing a simple, high-necked black dress and a camel hair coat draped over her shoulders. She wasn't looking at him with anger. She wasn't looking at him with sadness. She was looking at him with a clinical, detached curiosity, as if he were a specimen under a microscope. "What is she doing here?" Evelyn hissed, her grip tightening on Gregory's arm. "Did you invite that vulture to watch us struggle? Security, have that woman removed." A bailiff stepped forward, but he didn't move toward Clara. He moved toward Evelyn. "Please take your seat, ma'am. The proceedings are about to begin." Gregory ignored Clara, or tried to. He took his place at the plaintiff's table, glancing over at the defense table. It was empty. "Where are they?" Gregory muttered to his lead attorney, a man named Henderson who looked like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. "Where is the SV Holding Group? If they don't show up, we win by default, right?" "They're here, Gregory," Henderson whispered, his voice trembling. They're waiting for the judge to convene." The side door opened and Judge Miller took the bench. He was a man known for his lack of patience and his absolute adherence to the letter of the law. He didn't look at Gregory. He looked at a set of documents on his desk as if they were holy relics. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. The room stood. Gregory felt a bead of sweat roll down his spine. "Be seated," Judge Miller said. He adjusted his glasses. "We are here for the emergency hearing regarding the insolvency of Dalton International and the subsequent seizure of assets by the primary creditor, the Sterling-Vane Trust, operating through SV Holding." Gregory stood up immediately. "Your Honor, if I may, this is a gross overreach. We have had no time to review the transfer of our debt from the Royal Bank of Luxembourg. This is a coordinated attack on a private citizen's enterprise." The judge didn't even look up from his papers. "Mr. Dalton, your debt was sold in a legal open market transaction which you signed off on in paragraph 42 of your 2019 expansion agreement. The insecurity clause was triggered by your own firm's failure to maintain a 3-to-1 asset-to-debt ratio after your recent divorce filing became public. The creditor is within their rights." But who is the creditor? Gregory shouted, his composure finally snapping. Who is hiding behind these shell companies? Show me the person who thinks they can buy my life. The judge looked up then, and a small, grim smile played on his lips. The creditor is not hiding, Mr. Dalton. In fact, they are the one who requested this hearing be opened to the record. Counsel, please introduce the principal. The doors at the front of the courtroom opened, and Arthur Vane walked in, looking every bit the international power broker he was. But he didn't go to the defense table. He walked straight to the back row, held out his hand, and escorted Clara forward. The sound of Clara's heels on the wooden floor was like the ticking of a clock. Click, click, click. She walked past Evelyn, who had turned a shade of gray that matched the walls. She walked past Henderson, who bowed his head. She walked all the way to the front, standing directly across from Gregory. Your Honor, Arthur Vane said, his voice echoing with authority, my principal, the sole beneficiary of the trust and the majority shareholder of SV Holding, is present. Gregory looked at Clara, his mouth hanging open. Clara? What? What is this? Did you get a job with these people? Are you their secretary? Is this some sick joke to get back at me? Clara looked at him, and for the first time she spoke. Her voice wasn't the soft, hesitant whisper of the obedient wife. It was a voice of pure, tempered steel. I didn't get a job, Gregory. I took back my name. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, I am Clara Sterling-Vane. My father was Harrison Sterling-Vane. 12 years ago, I entered into a marriage with Mr. Dalton under a modesty agreement facilitated by my father's estate. That agreement stated that should the marriage end due to the husband's infidelity or unilateral abandonment, the Sterling-Vane Trust would immediately reclaim all capital invested in the husband's ventures. She turned back to Gregory, whose face was now a mask of pure horror. The house you threw me out of was bought with a Sterling-Vane grant. The company you call Dalton International was built on a series of zero-interest loans from my father's private reserves. Even the suit you are wearing right now was likely paid for by a line of credit that belongs to me. No, Evelyn shrieked from the gallery. No, she's lying. She's a waitress's daughter. We checked her background. You checked the background I created for myself, Clara said, looking at her mother-in-law, because I wanted to see if you were capable of treating a human being with respect regardless of their bank account. You failed, Evelyn, miserably. The judge cleared his throat. The court has verified the identity of the principal. Mr. Dalton, the clause of total recall is valid. As of 9 a.m. this morning, you are no longer the CEO of Dalton International. You are a debtor in default. Gregory collapsed into his chair. The room felt like it was spinning. The nobody he had discarded hadn't just been his wife. She had been his oxygen. She had been the foundation of the very earth he walked on. Clara, he stammered, his voice breaking. Clara, please, we can talk about this. I was stressed. I didn't mean those things. Juliana, she was a mistake. Clara leaned over the table, her face inches from him. You weren't stressed, Gregory. You were honest. You told me I was training wheels. You told me I was dead weight. Well, the training wheels are off, Gregory. Let's see how well you can ride. The exit from the courtroom was not a walk. It was a funeral procession for a legacy built on sand. Gregory Dalton stumbled down the stone steps, his tie crooked, his eyes vacant. Behind him, Evelyn leaned heavily on her cane, but no one rushed to help her. The friends and associates who usually swarmed them had vanished, replaced by a cold, biting wind that seemed to chase them toward the street. Standing at the curb was the same black rental car Gregory had arrived in. A man in a high-visibility vest was already attaching it to a tow truck. "You can't do that!" Evelyn shrieked, her voice cracking in the open air. "That's a private rental!" "Actually, ma'am," the man said, not looking up from his chains, "the credit card used to secure this vehicle was flagged as fraudulent 10 minutes ago. The Sterling-Vane Group has assumed all outstanding liabilities of the Dalton estate. This car is being returned to the lot. You'll have to find another way home." "Home," Gregory whispered, looking up at the gray sky. "We don't have a home." He looked across the street. A fleet of black SUVs sat idling. In the center of them stood Clara. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was flanked by Arthur and a team of security detail, but she looked more like a force of nature than a billionaire. Gregory broke away from his mother and ran toward the SUVs. "Clara, wait!" Security stepped forward to block him, but Clara raised a hand. They stepped back, allowing Gregory to approach, though he stopped 5 feet away, intimidated by the sheer aura of power she now radiated. "Clara, please," Gregory panted. "I know I messed up. I know I was cruel, but 12 years, that has to count for something. You loved me once. You can't just leave us on the street. My mother is 70 years old. She can't live in a shelter." Clara looked at him, and for the first time in the entire ordeal, a small, sad smile touched her lips. "You're right, Gregory. 12 years does count for something. It counts for the 12 years of my life I gave to a ghost. It counts for the thousands of meals I cooked while you ignored me, and the hundreds of times I defended you to my father while he told me you were a hollow man." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small white envelope. She held it out to him. Gregory's eyes lit up with a spark of hope. "Is it a check? A settlement?" He snatched the envelope and ripped it open. Inside was not a check. It was a single laminated business card for a local homeless outreach program and a one-way bus ticket to his hometown in Ohio, the small, dusty village he had spent his whole life trying to forget. "That's your settlement, Gregory," Clara said. "It's exactly what you gave me on the night of the blizzard, a way out and nothing else. As for your mother, I've made a donation in her name to a very reputable assisted living facility. It's modest, clean, and far away from any country clubs. She'll have a bed and 3 meals a day. It's more than she offered me." "You're a monster," Gregory hissed, the desperation turning back into the arrogance that was his only defense. "No," Clara said, stepping closer until they were eye to eye. "I'm the mirror, Gregory. I'm just showing you exactly who you are without my light reflecting off you. You thought you were the sun, but you were just a moon, and tonight the eclipse is permanent." She turned and climbed into the back of the lead SUV. As the door closed, Gregory was left standing in the exhaust, the bus ticket fluttering in his hand. 3 months later, the Dalton mansion underwent a transformation that was the talk of the state. Clara didn't sell it. She didn't burn it down. Instead, she hired a team of world-class architects to gut the interior. The iron gates that had once locked her out were removed and replaced with an open archway decorated with stone roses. The Sterling-Vane Center for Displaced Families opened its doors on a sunny Tuesday in May. The Grand Library, where Juliana had once plotted her mergers, was now a learning center for women seeking to restart their careers. The ballroom was a dining hall that served gourmet meals to those who had spent too many nights in the cold. Clara stood in the garden, the one Juliana wanted to pave over, and looked at the flowers. They were in full bloom, vibrant and resilient. "The center is at capacity, Clara," Arthur said, walking up behind her. "We've already helped 50 families find permanent housing this month. Your father would be very proud." "I think he would. He always said wealth is a responsibility, not a trophy." "And what about the others?" Arthur asked. Clara looked toward the gate. "I heard Gregory is working at a car wash in Ohio, and Evelyn, she spends her days telling the nurses at the home that she used to own a mansion, but no one believes her. They think she's just another confused old woman." "Do you pity them?" Clara watched a young mother and her child playing on the lawn that was now meant for running, not for show. She felt a deep, profound sense of peace. The anger was gone. The hurt was a scar, but scars are just proof of healing. Pity requires an emotional connection, Arthur, Clara said, turning back toward the house, and I don't have any left for them. I spent 12 years being their stepping stone. Now I'm building a bridge for everyone else. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the Sterling-Vane Center, the name on the entrance sign seemed to catch the light. It wasn't a name that froze the room anymore. It was a name that promised warmth. The nobody had found her voice, and in doing so, she had changed the world for 100 nobodies just like her.